Everybody be drinking at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
I better call
That
Luke,
just
he was
screwed the
planning
whole
on being
thing
there.
up.
Not that I'm,
Usually there.
big pool.
Get a Bloody Mary with no eggs.
Again, no food, I'm usually there about 7, 8.
Well, we take off at 7:30, so.
Ken, I said get comfortable anywhere, but I'm gonna move you because we're gonna put applicants there. I'm sorry, it's not really a front This is our agenda.
Same as that piece.
That's what John created about this first piece, which is the interior.
Put 2 on there. Snatch it and have the 30.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that she wasn't, so.
Here, talking about my current use. They were never paid by payroll. They try to get me $12,500 calling for $125,000. I only paid $130 because I had a fire. We never paid for that. I told you that, right?
No.
I was gonna give it to my buddy.
All right, 7 o'clock, so I'm gonna call the May 7th, 2019 meeting of the Rollinsford Planning Board to order. And it looks like the first order of business, unless the board member wants to suggest otherwise, would be the public hearing regarding the conditional use permit by Mark Mativier of 249 Clement Road, requesting a conditional use permit for a proposed accessory dwelling unit added to the existing dwelling located at tax map 1 lot 43-1. So here. Mr. Barry, you're representing Mr. Mativier on this?
Turns out.
All right. Well, please go ahead.
Oh, you never met, you know that?
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Christopher Berry with Berry Surveying and Engineering, representing Mr. Mativier here this evening, and the builder, Bob Gagnon. About 3.5 years back, we subdivided off one of the original lots on Clement Road. As part of the Arthur Gagnon subdivision. Claude built the house for Mr. Mativier, and they've since moved in and been living there peacefully ever since. Apparently, is it your mother?
My mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law.
My mother-in-law about this.
So his mother-in-law is at a point in her life where she needs to move into their house, and so they applied for a building permit for an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, which is generally permitted in the state of New Hampshire now, and permitted by your ordinance, but it's permitted only by conditional use permit. And so we're required to come to the planning board and discuss the merits of the conditional use permit to allow for the ADU itself. A few points of interest, a few things that aren't necessarily shown on the septic design that John points out in his memo is we would extend the driveway down to the front portion of the structure and provide a turnoff in front of the structure so that...
Chris, can you show us where?
Sure.
Just mark up where here.
So this structure actually has a garage and living space. So this would look, something like that.
Yep.
So that somebody isn't obligated to try and back out on the Clement Road, which we all know is not a great situation. So one of the other things that is discussed in the ordinance is that the ADU is required to be 500 square feet or less. Part of that structure, and that's 500 square feet of living space, part of that structure is a garage structure. And one of the things that John pointed out is that I didn't submit architectural drawings, and so the clients have given me what they had submitted to the planning, the building department as drawings. You can pass those around and just see what it's gonna look like. A couple of things to note, the garage, the existing garage, I could just have that checked. The existing garage is, on the house is here, and it has a gable roof that runs like this, and so we're proposing to just carry that gable roof all the way through so that it'd be one consistent shape and look as you're looking at it from the driveway side. And from the street side, you pretty much not know that it's there because the gable will match up right on down the line. So we have, the purpose of this plan was originally to propose a revised septic design until we realized that we needed to come for a conditional use permit for the ADU. And so this shows the expansion onto the proposed septic. Currently, it's a pipe and stone system. It's known shape and origin. It's brand new. And currently, we would like to get what we call a pocket design. So we design it, we know that it's permittable, and then not necessarily install it until such time as it's really required by the applicants to have it installed. John points out in his memo that that may or may not be appropriate, and I guess what I would ask the board is to just leave it up to the state as to whether or not they felt that a pocket design in this instance is acceptable. Our experience with this is the way DES is interpreting the ADU law that is relatively new. They are trying not to put large onuses on people for creating these types of in-law apartments, if you will. And so they do allow, in this instance, pocket designs. What they don't allow is other expansions of use, such as additional bedrooms to be installed without having a system designed and installed at that time also. I think, John, there were a couple of other clerical things.
Before you move on, Mr. Burby, kind of to explain the phrase pocket design.
Oh, I'm
For
sorry.
those
I'm
that
sorry.
I'm not that familiar with,
Yep.
and I apologize.
Nope, I use jargon sometimes and I shouldn't. So a pocket design is you submit a plan, so we would submit this plan to DES, and they would say, yep, this plan looks good, it's approved for this use, but the installation is not actually instituted. And so there were often cases where people would take a 2-bedroom house and then convert it to a 4-bedroom or larger house, and we would get what was called a pocket design. So we would design a septic system that would be approved for that number of bedrooms, and the applicants would never install it. The issue with that was, you have 10, 15 years that go by, 2 or 3 people have bought and sold the home at that point, and then all of a sudden the system fails and they realize, well, this was never really designed for this intent otherwise. The reason DES views ADU units a little differently is typically you don't have a large household in the primary structure, and you have a very low water usage in the secondary ADU use. So you have a much lower potential and possibility for future failures of the system. So in this case, that's why they allow for us to get an approved septic system, but not necessarily install it. The purpose for the approved system is to prove that you can fit everything you need to fit on the site and meet sewage loading on the site so that it is approvable. Because you will have instances in town, every town has them, where lots are too small even for the additional ADU unit. So that's why we require to get the septic design approved.
So you're saying basically approve the design, but give us permission not to install it.
That's right.
And would you ever be compelled to install it?
If you had a failure.
If you wanted
Yeah, only if you had a failure.
That's
Okay,
right.
all right. Please go on, I apologize for
Yep.
the interruption.
So, John, I don't have your narrative right in front of me, but my recollection was that the rest of this was clerical. I think our fingers got ahead of us on the town's name and the title block. John pointed out that he'd really like to see a turnaround. And we did clarify with John today that the town has not expanded the ADU square footage. It is still 500 square feet. So the circulated drawing would just need to be revised in size a little bit prior to a building permit to make sure that it's 500 square feet of living space.
All right. Anything further, Mrs. Berry, before we?
Not unless you wanted me to move point by point through the conditional use criteria. They are pretty basic. Hopefully the board had an opportunity to read through them. I can if if you wish, Mr. Chairman.
John Krebs, what do you recommend on that?
Well, it's all laid out, I think in 8.1.3, they're pretty straightforward, I think Chris is right, so I will tell you, he complies with all of them. The only thing that I wanted to see was the architectural design, which I haven't seen, but I think it went around here. I do have sort of mixed feelings. I know the state allows these hip pocket approvals for these ADUs. I don't like the practice. I think, in fact, the exact opposite, that if you go from a 3-bedroom to a 4-bedroom house and you get a hip pocket approval, the load on your septic system is probably gonna be minimal. But I know the applicant is saying his mother-in-law is moving in, but what happens if it's a husband, a couple?
They get sold.
And they have a little kitchenette, they're using more water. I think it's beyond this board's purview, unfortunately. I think if the state says he doesn't have to put it in, he doesn't have to put it in, I'd like, it's a brand new system. I would, add on to it now, but I think it's probably beyond our purview.
Kevin?
I don't have a problem with the hip pocket approval, basically because it does say if there is a failure in the future, there is a viable plan that can be installed, approved, fits, that can be implemented fairly quickly to remedy the situation should you have a failure in the original. So, I mean, that's kind of how I read the, saying that it's actually approved. You have another plan, backup, turnkey.
No, I understand the law.
I mean, isn't
It's been around
that's kind
forever.
of the peace of mind of it, right?
Yeah.
But I guess, funding could become an issue if this happens and the 2 buyers downstream, yeah, it's approved, but we can't put it in, I do see that validity to that side of the argument too.
Any of the board members have any comments on?
I'm concerned, I have to say, because although, I think the state law was trying to ameliorate the housing crisis and make these things easier, more approvable. I don't like the pocket design just because properties sell over time, and while it's one person in that space now, it's almost guaranteed not to be at some point. It'll be rented out as an apartment with how many people in it someday. So I guess, that's the caveat emptor on the next owner. But
You don't want to put it in, do you?
Excuse me? No.
no, I mean, and I cannot, I wouldn't expect that anybody would want to undertake that additional
Yeah.
expense if they weren't forced to.
The tank doesn't change.
But I think partly too, in all the changes as of recent with the ability to add ADUs to houses, I think that they're trying to make it a little bit easier. I mean, if
Yeah.
someone has to, who just built the house, now has to install a larger septic system capacity when he has a perfectly fine one now. But, I mean, I understand guidelines being what they may be. 2 buyers down the street down the road from now may not have the funds to do it, but,
And may not realize what they're getting. I think it's not necessarily obvious to a future buyer. Or at
But
least what
to
the
some degree, I feel it's
implications are.
penalizing the current
Well,
owner
right,
to
that's
the
not
point where
necessarily
he
fair.
has a functioning system, and if it does fail in his ownership of the house, he knows he has to address it. He's the one that installed it, so I don't, in my mind, the pocket, I know we keep beating it to death, but, I don't have concerns about that, I guess. That wouldn't hold me back.
I think it's more about the intent of the law, which is to try to make these things easier for people to build.
Yeah.
It just still seems kind of flawed to me.
Mr. Barrett, someone was researching the chain of title in terms of buying this property in the future. Would there be notice, and I'm an attorney, but I don't do title work, would there be notice in the record that there was a pocket design here and not a fully implemented design or not?
No.
Not as a matter of practice, but I mean, we could, almost like we do, the intent to give an easement, but you don't give an easement right away. It's
The reality is, John, that, when and if this system fails, they're gonna have to build a new leach field, so, I don't think that, there doesn't need to be anything in the title to protect future buyers, because they're gonna have to replace a system that accommodates whatever the uses are, so. I think we may be beating this to death, but, because I think the state, even if we said we wanted them to install, the state's gonna say they don't have to, so.
Well, really quick, I'm the builder, Arthur Gagnon, Floyd Gagnon. If you're adding a system here, you're adding it to the system, realistically, if the system's gonna fail, you're not saving the system by 15, 20 years, you're saving it by a year maybe, or something like that. It's minimal by
Okay.
adding it now, so.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gagnon.
Especially, yeah, especially with this type of system. I mean, this is a pipe and stone system, these are one of the older style, tried and true type systems, you know. Might be more of a concern on a newer type system, but.
Any other board members have any questions at this point? Before we open for public comment, I should have asked the secretary at the beginning to indicate whether or not all the butters have been notified.
Yes, all the butters were duly notified, and notice was posted in Foster's and around town.
Thank you, thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on the speaker request tonight? I don't hear any, so, okay. All right, I'm gonna close the public hearing, yes. All right. And John, what should we do next at this point? Being a-
Well, what I'd like to see is a, would you mind just modifying that? What I'd like to see is the drawing modified, just to show the turnaround, showing the driveway going to the garage door.
Yeah.
And then maybe correct the spelling error.
Yeah.
And then, I think those would be the two conditions.
I found another spelling error for you.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no. That's not like this.
Talk to the tank. I know, somebody's getting flogged tomorrow.
So I guess the conditions I see are, correct the spelling errors, change the driveway, or add the driveway turnaround and make sure the driveway connects to the garage, and that's it.
And John, I assume that with the architectural drawing that was sent around today, that your concern number 4 was addressed by that?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So I think it might be appropriate this time for a motion to determine if the application is complete or.
Second.
All in favor that the motion, or the application is complete, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So it is deemed to be a complete application. Be appropriate to have a vote at this point. And would like to make a motion to approve or disapprove the application.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right.
And the conditions are correct the spelling errors, and revise the driveway to have a turnaround and connect to the garage. Two conditions.
Okay, so there's a motion for approval with the 2 conditions specified by Mr. Krebs. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Berry. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Tibbetts. Thank you, Mr. Gagnon.
Skip out of town.
It's gonna be revised.
Yeah, let's not, I'll wait for the revised.
No.
Actually, you know what, so I can compare it, yeah,
You better circle the other spelling error that you noticed,
yeah, I
that
did,
apparently I missed.
got it.
All right. Next on the agenda, if I'm reading correctly, is a preliminary review of a proposed subdivision of the Bennett property located at 658 Silver Street, tax map 20, lot 19. So those folks like to approach and begin their presentation, that'd be great.
Thank you, my name is Bob Stolen with Tri-Tip Engineering. This is, oh yeah, sorry, Mike
I'd to hear about it.
Hold on up, Mike.
Oh, okay.
Mike Brigham, the applicant. Mike is in the process of,
Oh, I'm so sorry, can you,
actually, my last name is Stowell, S-T-O-W-E-L-L.
S-T-O,
W-E-L-L.
and I'm sorry, your first name?
Wow.
Bob, okay.
Did you get
I
Mike?
think
Did you get Mike's thing?
No.
Mike Brigham.
B.
Brigham, like the ice cream.
Spelled the same?
Nice to see you. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So Mike is in the process of purchasing the Dr. Bennett property out on Silver Street that Mike You're closing soon, right?
I close tomorrow at 11:30. I did take possession of it 2 months ago, so I've been working on it, helping him clean out his debris. We're working on the barn now. It's one of the most beautiful properties that I've had the pleasure of owning, and tomorrow will be official.
So Mike is,
Congratulations.
Thank you. We've got a daughter enrolled in school. I got a 5-year-old. Be trying out your kindergarten. And I think Rollinsford honestly is an undiscovered gem, kind of, you know, it's like Southampton, it's kind of sneaky, people don't know it's here, and that's good. And I'm gonna respect it, you'll see.
yeah, so Mike is gonna live at the property, but Mike is also a builder, and would like to partially develop some of the property. So he's hired us to take a look at what the possibilities are there. And we've had some questions as we've gone through the process and of giving them some advice, and trying to be good to kind of talk with people and let you know what his plans are. And I know this is just preliminary consultation, but we do have some plans that we've put together. This is, it's sitting around for you guys. It's almost 11 acres of land. It's fronting on the Salmon Falls River, and it's at the dead end portion of Silver Street. This is the large Victorian that's there. That's quite an amazing house. This is a carriage house that Dr. Bennett was in the process of restoring. And what you can't see here very good is an outline of the
better picture.
the car barn that is planned to be reworked here as part of this project. I think that's the one thing that we wanted to go over and get you up to speed on what Mike would like to do there. This is a monster barn that Dr. Bennett has stored cars, sold cars, et cetera. But it's kind of limited in its reuse. So under this scenario, Mike is looking at taking that down. And in the process of taking it down, he's come across the fact that Dr. Bennett was he approached things differently. And the way he built that wasn't just to build a structure for a car barn. That's made up of 4 old timber frame barns.
I was so nervous, I brought Danley Demolition in here. We talked about going to one of the fireman breakfasts to see how we were gonna get this out of the way. And I ran up to a company in Berwick, Maine, that preserves, barn preservation company. And I brought them down there, and he said, whoa, just like in the house, just like some of the cars, the things that Dr. Bennett bought were kind of extravagant. So all the parts of this barn have little labels with numbers etched on them. They were bought, it's different places in New Hampshire, and then reassembled together. And then he covered it with a nasty siding and a metal roof, so you don't know what's in there. So I'm thinking, how can I take this historic home and this historic carriage home and match it with other homes? And now the idea is just to disassemble the 4 barns that are there and we're basically taking what's there and spreading it out.
That's the 4 structures, I see the picture
You
there.
see why they're odd shaped? These are the actual barns. If you look through the company that did this for us, they have gone in and surveyed. You can see them in that picture where he's highlighted them. So these will be authentic 1850 timber frame homes insulated from the outside. Basically along this whole side, we're just spreading the barn out. By doing it this way and leaving conservation land in the front and conservation land in the back, we've taken the character of this land and almost kept it this way forever. The front won't change at all. Basically, everything is lined up along the side where the barn is now, so that the view of this beautiful property should stay like it is under this scenario.
And the direction these 4 separate buildings are going now?
Right now, it's one big building.
Yeah,
What we're
and I'm
doing
seeing
is-
it splitting up, but
We're
I'm just
facing,
thinking the future plans of having 4 little barns spread out like that, and I love what it does for the
they're gonna be
property.
houses is the idea,
Okay,
basically.
that's where I was going.
Timber
So
frame-
we're talking residential dwelling units.
Changing it to what the neighborhood is zoned for, which is single family residential homes with views to the water, drive, and basically, character of an authentic 1850s.
Priceless,
Yeah, I mean, this, I've done a lot of developments, they're all kind of something special about them, but
Who knew?
yeah, I mean, this,
Oh, no.
this is what, this is the best, this is reusing historic property that's already, it's redeveloping the site, basically.
What is the structure at the far end of the development? Is that existing?
This is existing, this is existing.
No, at the far, that, yeah.
This would be another proposed residence, and it would be one to be simulated to look like the others, but it wouldn't be an authentic farm.
Have you marked out the 100-foot setback from the river on that plan?
We haven't, this is the 250 that goes along, like this is the 250 setback from the Salmon Falls. So to back up a second, this is Mike's vision on how to do this. My project that I'm here for you people for is, as far as we're proposing, this is in the urban residential, it's about 11 acres of land. We're proposing an open space subdivision, and we've gone through the applicable computations to determine what the appropriate density there is under the zoning ordinances as far as taking out steep slopes and wetlands and et cetera. And we've come up with the by zoning, the density should be seven dwelling units there. So what we've tried to do in coming up with 7 dwelling units is, we've got 2 of them are one is the main house, one is the carriage house that's under renovations. And then Mike's talking about what to do with the rest here. As far as the development of the site, what we've worked on here is providing open space all the way along the entire frontage of the river here, as well as this here, which is prime development land over there. What Mike's idea was there was to leave this completely natural. It's a big open lawn area now, so that as you're at Silver Street, and you turn in here from Silver Street and you look, this is what you see. You see the existing home as you do now. So that is the intent here, is work within the open space rules so that we can fit some new development in over here that's currently developed but in a different manner. We want to convert it to the permitted use, but again, trying to maintain the character of the way the property is today. So this is all proposed as open space. That's a little over an acre of land that would be maintained. It's currently got some landscaping and lawn area, and it provides that dramatic view as you pull in and see the main house. That's the overall. So we've got, out of our 7 allowed units, we've got the main house, the carriage house, and splitting up the existing barn into 4. And then this is one that would be.
I'm calling it a future lot. I'm gonna live in this house. It's a lot more house than I planned on, but I'm falling in love as I'm restoring it. But someday it's gonna be too much, and I don't want to be out there shopping again, so the goal would be to not, this will not get built in the immediate future. This is something that I wanna sit on and have for later in life. It's my dream location here, and I don't want to get myself mixed up in the wrong house. You know, someday it's just a massive house.
To give you a little bit of context, this is
It shows the land here.
the same plan overlaid on an aerial photo. That again shows where the car barn is here. It shows an area that was reworked pretty dramatically here to get under here's a drive under the car barn. It's about a 16-foot high lower level that he used to work on the vehicles. So this has all been regraded and disturbed and kind of left in disrepair. This is the open area that currently has one of the driveways, part of the loop driveways that would be removed and turned into a lawn area there. And again, this Mike's currently working on. This would be a future project. We've got an older barn out here that's beyond repair that would be removed at the same time the car barn is.
The goal is when you buy into this, you get a piece of the common, and you get the right to have a picnic or a birthday party. I met one of the abutters who said that someone was looking at this for wedding venues, and it's that nice. And so the whole goal is, don't wreck it, push off to the sides and then share it. And by doing this, we would deed it to be forever undeveloped in case rules ever do change.
Right, this would be the open space that would be deed restricted in ownership by the homeowners association, that would be permanently deed restricted from any future development. The density is the density, can't be further subdivided, can't be additional development.
John, any comments, initial comments?
No.
No, I mean, I talked to Bob about it, but I didn't know what they were, I will tell you, I've had a bunch of phone calls about this property for the last, I don't know how long it's been in the market, 4 or 5 years or whatever.
Exactly.
You know, another developer was talking about, you know, cutting this into apartments, doing a 55+ project here. So a lot of people have looked at it, but I will say this is probably the coolest, I mean, probably the most sensitive thing I've heard anybody talk about doing, so, you know, I think that's a pretty cool thing. And I wasn't aware of the barn.
Seen it.
Oh,
I've
really?
driven by 100 times.
You've gotta come anytime, you guys, if there's a sidewalk or whatever. My company's Lorax Sustainable Development. I grew up in Portsmouth. The developments I do are conservation subdivisions. I do no fossil fuels. I don't think there's any need for them. These houses will be, except possibly the existing house, net zero. They'll be, the way they're facing, they all have plenty of exposure to the south. They're gonna have heat pumps or geothermal heat. They're gonna be insulated tight. A little extra thought in the beginning makes a high-performance home for many years to come. This could be front page news well, Foster's is already talking about it, but the fact that we're gonna create the first net zero neighborhood, and I'm gonna struggle hard. With enough solar panels, you can almost net zero anything, but we're insulating the heck out of this house. We're really looking into the best way to try to get those 2 oil tanks out of the basement. But this will be a net zero neighborhood. These houses will all make all the power that they need to heat and cool themselves. And they're gonna be basically reusing or repurposing a barn that was hand-selected from some of the best frames that are out there by a well-known, they're called Preservation Timber Framing. And these guys from the beginning. Was that? You should have seen one. They sent 3 guys down here and they started measuring and sketching. And they're talking about, this is one of those Hegel joints, and look, they haven't, you know, and they were respecting, and they actually, these are the actual barns that they've drawn out with all of the, so we now know what these houses are gonna be.
Wow.
And Dr. Bennett confirmed it, that he bought 4 barns and then put 3 side by side and disassembled one. And all we're merely gonna do, you can't knock it down once you've been in it. It's, from the outside, it's nasty, but this is historic. And couldn't match the theme any better than anything I could have created.
If I can ask a couple questions, your term, the Lorax, is from Dr. Seuss, is that right? Are you, and I'm glad to hear that, are you gonna try to preserve as many of the trees there that are currently there, or are you gonna be knocking some down?
There's some are gonna go, but absolutely, trees are a big, important part of this development. If there's some areas where I can weed out some stuff to help others, and views are important, but we have it. We sit up high and look down onto the water. Every one of these will have water views, by the way.
Okay.
It's gonna be a real neat little enclave of home.
Would the plan be for underground utilities?
Absolutely.
Good.
The only thing I'm not sure is, you know, if you look at the plan, we've been through this battle before. Is this gonna be a town road or are you gonna do it, is it gonna be private?
Town. Scarlet Lane, after my dog.
We've tried to do cul-de-sacs like this, and the fire department wants nothing to do with them, so.
No Hammerhead kind of.
I don't know
things
what
like
to
that.
tell you. And I think this board would be very supportive of a hammerhead or a T or a P, but.
The thought is the term. So you, basically Bob can tell you that he was afraid that that could come up, and he did draw a second concept. It's more road, it's more pervious coverage.
And we get all that.
Worst way to
We
do
cannot
this.
sell the fire department on
They
it.
can turn around, yeah.
Well, I think that's where maybe we have a technical review meeting,
Or what if there is I mean, I've got two roundabouts kind of,
I think I'm not trying to get frustrated with you, I'm just saying that our frustration, I think this board is willing to, at least we have in the
want to
past,
show them the difference.
been, willing to, I've tried to explain to the town, to both the public works department, or the road agent and the fire department, that these things are easier to plow, they're more maneuverable. They never seem to want to hear it, but I think we can have that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, we,
Just in case you said that. We want to vote.
typically, what we try to do in the cluster subdivision concept is to look at where we want to site the structures. And we found that the building sites that we thought were the most appropriate building sites, keeping in mind that Mike wanted to keep this area up front here clean so that he could maintain the presence of the house there. And then once we get there, we figured out the best way to get the infrastructure there rather than having the road drive the development. So we on these types of projects, that we feel that the hammerhead is more efficient, it's less pavement, et cetera, but we understand it doesn't fit with everybody's rules. That was one of the things we wanted to review this evening, is how that would be received, and are we swimming upstream, or maybe we are, but maybe it's worth it,
it's not just fire department, the highway department's gonna have a problem with it too.
What did Schindberg, the Schindberg cul-de-sac, is that paved?
He did the hammerhead.
That's a hammerhead,
That's a
and,
hammerhead?
and everybody keeps
And
saying,
he-
how did that happen, and how did it get approved, and they're begrudging it.
Yeah, I like it, I mean, God, sometimes love them.
It makes it really hard to stack snow. Like up there, it's hard to put snow not in somebody's driveway.
It doesn't snow at all. Well, I mean, it's a discussion that we'd have to have, or that, we, and maybe Caroline could, as a new town administrator, we could have a technical review committee meeting with the public works and the fire safety people to see
We
if
should
there's.
have both, you can kind of
Right.
see it,
Right.
it's more, it's definitely more everything,
Yeah.
the other ones.
Yeah, I mean,
And we've also fought for narrow roads, and that seems to never go anywhere either, so. But those are discussions we can have. I mean, it's such a short road, it's not gonna really matter.
No, it's not an expense thing, it's a.
Yeah, no, I get it, I get it, I
Yeah,
understand.
it's- But this is, we've been through the road standards, this complies with the road standards. We would be in that category of between 50 and 200 vehicles a day, so 22 feet of pavement, or 20 feet of pavement, 2-foot shoulders. I assume that we wouldn't do sidewalks out here, I don't know if that's,
There's nothing in Silver Street, is there?
I don't think there's anything nearby
I don't think so either.
We are creating a walking trail, I don't know if it's shown, so that everyone has access to come down to this beautiful
Yeah,
part of it down here.
Somewhere, one of these property lines, I think this is probably the likely guy that comes out here, there's an old gazebo that was built out here that we would like to maintain and have that as part of a walking.
Yeah, it's there, right
It's way, it's a view, that's why it became a wedding.
So there's a 250-foot structure setback from the river, but I think there's a 100-foot, John, maybe you remember, there's some other no cutting zone.
Yeah, but they're not proposing.
He showed the most restrictive, which is the
Yeah.
250, and part of your other talk was that some of the barn is already in it, and we were keeping it equal.
Yeah, what we would like to do is from here, if we're heading in the right direction with this, is proceed to the zoning board to see if we can put these structures here where we would like to, within that 250. And again, from the engineering, and what I did was I looked at how much structure we currently had within the 250 and balanced it out and said, seems like a trade. Whether that's an argument with the zoning board, I don't know, but that's what we presented. Again, we looked at particularly
Cleaning up the problem.
if you look at, again, on the aerial photo, this is the 250 line here. This is a massive hole that was dug to create the drive under for this barn. What we'd like to do is keep it right on that.
I'm not sure he ever went to zoning for approval for that
Oh, God.
barn.
I mean, I don't know
It's
what,
18 feet deep, but the excavation that happened here inside the setback
I don't know when it was
is
built,
wrong.
but did it predate zoning? I don't
No.
know. I don't know how.
It just keeps getting bigger, or did it happen all at once?
No,
It happened at once.
I don't know. But
Well,
I
it
mean,
might have
it's-
morphed some, but I
It's
don't
so,
think that
it's
went
not
to
like it
zoning.
happened yesterday, so I mean, it's clearly grandfathered for some.
If anything, they're making the
Well-
site better, because you say
That's
there's
what
an
we do.
18-foot hole dug right down into the
You can't,
setback of
It's
the.
not an argument that they're gonna have to make to you.
But they're,
It's just
they're
something they gotta make
improving the
zoning
quality of
board.
the
Yeah.
site
It's a good
as far as the setback is concerned.
Yeah, but I think it does have to go to zoning.
if it's a redevelopment and it's working out equal, does it still need to get a variance, or is it
It
just?
never
a-
really went to zoning to begin with, or I think it would have to be proven that it was. So like, I think the idea that it's a wash doesn't preclude it from the process.
Because it never took the process before.
Particularly for that reason, but I think anyway.
It's a good argument. Yeah, no.
Yeah, it's
We're trying to fix it.
clearly the part of this construction, this area is all disturbed, it needs to be dealt with, and to be able to do it at these locations would be advantageous for the overall development, definitely. But that, we know that that's a step we need to go with zoning board, but we thought this was a nice informal procedure, we
Yeah.
could see if we were getting traction with you guys first before we start going down that road. And back here, it wasn't well received.
I have a couple questions in that. I just wanted to verify, but got the impression that this is part of the 11 acres, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Oh, good.
Exactly, that the 11 acres is down to the river and up and down to Silver Street. There's a couple of out parcels here that came out of the parcels a long time ago, but it's just shy of 11 acres.
What is that line delineating down at the bottom there,
This here?
perpendicular to the river? Perpendicular to the
This?
river.
This is
By
not-
the R, in the, like the first R,
This
yeah.
is the dimension line for 250.
Oh, I see,
That
okay.
It's
shows-
probably showing up on,
Yeah,
it shows it here.
It shows better on here,
Okay.
it's 250, a
You can
dimension.
see that 250 setback.
We did find a little pocket of wetlands down here where it's a lot flatter at the river, and then there's a little bit that shadows the river bank here that we've had mapped and have identified.
And still learning the region. Where does, there's Short Street and then Silver Street?
Just Cumberland Farms.
Here's the bend in the road,
You're heading over all.
and that's the dead end portion of Silver
You
Street.
you never go down that
It's
road.
still-
Short Street is right
Yeah.
Oh, right
here.
here.
That's typically
Yes.
not traveled.
There's Sligo, Silver,
It's short,
Short.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I was just trying to visualize that.
I think Cumbies came out of this lot at one point.
It could have been, absolutely.
Okay.
I walk this all the time, but I'm ashamed to say, on the corner there, where you go to the Bennett property for vehicles heading towards Silver Street, is there a stop sign there now or not?
no,
No.
you go right around the corner.
Well, the right of way
The right-of-way is-
goes onto Short
is-
Street.
Sure, but I mean, if you're going this
Is
way,
there one
the other
there?
direction,
Yeah.
is there a stop sign right there now?
There should be, I don't know if there is now.
Well, I'm just thinking with your 50 to 200 vehicles trips a day, that'll probably in the town up there.
If you look at the aerial photo, John, it doesn't appear that there is one.
I don't think there is one either, that's what my thought was.
I guess
I
the
pull out,
only
I tend to.
the only people that live, they go down
Yeah,
there.
I do stop. California.
I'll ask a question.
What's that?
I'll find out.
And just, again, imagining as the houses get built, that these two seem closer together than the rest. And are there, so that would be, the houses would be different sizes than these over here?
Right, and as Mike has talked about, is the idea is to build these foundations on what it will cost, yeah, that's a better picture. Here, we would put the foundation in on 5 and 7, so that the barn can be dismantled and erected there. Not just the logistics of doing it, that's the likely.
What's the side setback?
The sides are 15, I think.
So there's still about 40 or so feet, I think, between them.
That is one of the things that you give up in the clustered type development, is the house.
In order to have the common land, you gotta get them smaller lots for the individuals.
Yeah, I guess
It allows us to do this, otherwise you could have 8 1-acre lots, and that's the old way.
right.
We don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I guess I was just, thinking cluster housing, but, this looks terrific space as opposed to these.
You might switch those driveways to the middle, to push the houses a little bit further apart.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just an opinion, how I would feel.
Yeah, as long as they meet setbacks, I mean,
they're kind of blocked in there.
All right. Any other members of the board have any questions for these?
Just a parting comment for whatever renovations you're doing on the existing structures. Read the zoning ordinance for building permit requirements.
Yeah, right
Because
now,
you need one for nearly everything.
right now it's been painting and waterproof in the basement, you know, things like that, because I don't close until tomorrow, but that's mostly what it needs. We're not like ripping out kitchens or adding, but I will, I promise. I don't wanna start off on the wrong foot.
Can I just clarify my own
Yeah.
mind, where you said you took possession, but your closing is
No.
tomorrow?
I leased it.
You leased it?
Right, what they did was, once they accepted my offer, they needed a certain period of time to empty it and to empty the barns. So
Fine,
they
you
ended up
leased
leasing
it. That meant to hear that.
So I'm living there now.
Yeah.
And that was the only other question I had was, if we wanted to come back to the next meeting next month, there's a deadline in which you need to receive this package before that,
It's at least 20 days.
20 days?
But we're gonna wanna go to zoning first. What is?
So you're not gonna meet the next planning board meeting because zoning will happen in the meantime. Zoning
Because
doesn't
of the
meet.
variance?
Yes,
Right.
variance. So I think there's only so much they can give us on this until we know we have a variance.
Right, we couldn't work on it without needing the variance. We're pushing.
I was trying to figure, I've been looking at that.
It's in this
If you
30-day
could- if you
deal.
could make the back lot, if you could make this the back lot, the problem you've got is this stupid lot, I mean,
Let's say we just drew this house here for now,
well, then you're in trouble with this one. I mean,
Yeah,
so we'd have to.
you could make the, I've been looking at that. You
I mean,
see, you could
obviously,
make this the
people
back
wanna-
lot and push the house up here and then give this one more width. I mean, Bob might be able to play with a lot line. If you come in with a plan that conforms to the zoning ordinance, and then you wanna go back and get a variance to push the house back here, that's your prerogative.
It would
But,
just-
but, I hear you, but if you come in here with a house within 250, our hands are tied. So if there's a way you can reconfigure it,
I understand.
I even thought about, pushing a house up here, but obviously you don't wanna do that, so.
That's the easy way to solve it.
I know,
but We
I
don't
know.
want to.
I know,
put it
and
there.
I don't wanna tell you what to do, because I think it's awesome that you're preserving the field, so I don't know.
What is the zoning board schedule?
It does not
As
meet
needed.
regularly, it needs to call the chair. So when there's an application, they will schedule a meeting.
Okay.
But with posting requirements, it would be at least like 3 or 4 weeks. And then the planning board only meets on the first Tuesday of every month. And as she said, 20 days prior to that meeting date. So it could take maybe 3 months, depending on how meeting schedules align.
I'm following you.
How quickly have they been running, do you follow?
A couple of weeks, I mean,
Pretty quickly.
it's more
Oh,
based on
John's-
notification
Oh.
requirements.
Because, I think that's a simple process to get a submission and for that, but it's more, he does that when he can write that stuff.
I'm just anxious to get, I know even, it might be 1 or 2 of these meetings, and then if things go well, it's the appeal period, next thing you know, fall, but it is what it is, so. If there was a way to apply for both, if the variance meeting
The
first.
problem, I mean,
Is there any point in doing design review while we're waiting? Is that something we can? No.
I don't know, you can ask the board, I mean, I think the feedback you got from tonight was pretty positive, so I don't.
I think
I
that's
mean-
pretty straightforward myself.
My one concern is, and I don't know how to mitigate this, is that they'll get whatever plan approved by the ZBA, assuming that happens, and then technical review might want to tweak something, and I don't know how that impacts.
Well, I think what they're gonna ask for is, a portion of 1 or 2 homes in a 250-foot setback. It's not gonna affect.
It really should be mostly about the.
It's, right, it's not gonna affect the road layout or.
And we thought we'd give it a set distance so that we can push and pull the distance. But instead of saying 250, this one might be 200, and this one might be 150. We thought we'd frame it like that, so we could come back and have some flexibility with you.
Yeah, that would be my one concern.
So I guess it's, as soon as the zoning board.
Okay. We'll get that in so we can get that in process. Is there anything currently scheduled?
Is there one?
Anything currently scheduled for
There's
this?
something for May 14th.
Yes.
It's too quick, but the Chairman Charlie Putnam is very, reasonable and accommodating, so.
Okay. All
Or is
right.
that's too quick for us?
Yeah, because we gotta notice it and,
The notice of requirements.
Well, you can do that. There's plenty of time, I'll help. I'm disappointed.
Great attitude.
well, Greg, I really appreciate,
Yeah, that was very helpful.
the input. And,
Oh, yeah, that's awesome, I'm not gonna want that.
Anytime, I mean, that's my whole goal, is to make that waterfront something beautiful, we can have a picnic, I'm loving it.
Where else have you built similar projects?
Portsmouth, I did Brigham Lane, which overlooks downtown Portsmouth. My name is Brigham, and it means Bridge Hamlet, or House by the Bridge, so I got away with it.
Yeah.
The village at White Pond in Madbury, same thing, it was a fish and game pond. And these are the things I like, I just did a three lot on Thompson Pond, which is in Portsmouth, where Flowers by Leslie used to be on Woodbury Ave. And then Eric Schimberg bought it from me. I just did in Kittery, the landmark Hill Plaza, which is right on the Route 1 Kittery-York line. Kind of a run-down old plaza where Domino's Pizza used to be. And we got 11 new houses in the back, and we converted the commercial to condominiums. Come to find out, there was a need for those. We've just about sold them out. But the whole idea of mixed use and conservation subdivisions, I did a subdivision in Dover on the old Elliott Rose property with Chad Caggiolari. We did the original part of it, all geothermal heating and cooling. You'll never buy oil again. Too soon, nobody cared. But those people who bought in there now are very happy, and they've got low heating and cooling bills and no oil tanks. But at the time, me thinking that it was gonna increase the market, I mean, it was too soon. But today, I drive an electric car and I park it in front of a house that was built before there was electricity, and I'm gonna make a point. I couldn't find a more beautiful place to do it, My Tesla charges, it doesn't even have a garage, it has a carriage house.
do you want us to leave you with that?
Is there
then,
anything-
or,
I would take it, just because it was, it was informal and that way.
yeah.
No, I would take it.
Oh,
You-
I
you
would
take
take
it.
it.
You- Yeah,
I would
I think,
take-
no, I think you should take it. Rest of you guys.
Thank you very much.
See you in a month or two.
Thank you. I got one up there.
So,
Take it on.
all right.
Can we adjourn that?
What's that? I'm sorry, I'm just getting a little help here, I'm still new. So next, we're gonna do the approval of minutes. Is that, everyone reviewed minutes from the last 2 meetings?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? The passes. Is there any correspondence?
No.
No. Okay, all right. Other business, revision of stormwater ordinances.
I do have one other item under other business, if you don't mind.
Okay,
Which is that we are reconvening the CIP committee.
Okay.
And of course, the CIP is a shared document between planning board and the select board, whereby we log and manage all of our assets and how much they cost and when they should be replaced. And so Kevin is serving on that. And I was just gonna bring it back to this board that we need to reappoint somebody to serve on that committee.
I'll sit on that again. I've done it a couple of years.
Excellent, so.
Why, were you expecting an argument?
I was a little bit reluctant, but, so I'll nominate Kevin Haynes to serve on the CIP committee.
is there a second? All right,
I'm so sorry, what,
My name's Ken.
Kelsey. C-A-L-C-I. I'm so sorry for not introducing
Oh,
you.
that's okay.
This is Sarah, she's our great fabulous secretary, she does a good job.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
You just send me emails when the meetings.
All right.
Yes, we'll start soon though, we're doing like
But
reprocess.
you have to send me emails. so-
Yes, yes.
All right, so what I understand, although I am somewhat, I want to proceed very cautiously, is that there's some
Let's do revision stormwater.
Okay, I'm sorry?
ordinances.
Revision of stormwater ordinances.
Okay, so, this is a big bag of worms, which is to say that the EPA, so Rollinsford has an MS4 permit through the EPA, which essentially means that we are a watershed district to one or more impaired waterways, which is not just the Salmon Falls River, but other brooks and tributaries in town which feed into the Salmon Falls and ultimately into the Great Bay Estuary. So that has put a great deal of requirements on this town. This is the first year of our permit. It's a 5-year permit, and each year we have progressively more restrictive requirements to meet in terms of public outreach and public engagement and in terms of regulations. And so planning regulations fall in that category. And I know that some revisions to the site review regs, I think. Site and so, but that was in April, I think, of 16 that they got approved. It was a while ago and I was not yet on the board.
I think it might have been 17.
Was it
17?
It wasn't as far back as 16.
It was,
Okay,
it was
so
probably
'Cause
17.
Mike was still on the board.
Mike who?
Rolo.
Well,
Okay, 17, yeah.
So it was before my time.
Yeah.
So Paul Casalt, who is the chairman of the Stormwater Committee, has been attending in my stead, and I'm gonna be attending more of the meetings of the Regional Stormwater Coalition, which is advising the town with regard to how we fulfill our requirements. So our subdivisions have to, our regulations have to meet certain standards to ensure that we are paying attention to how much impervious surface, that we are drainage and retention ponds, that we're
Yeah.
requiring them when necessary, that we, not just that, but that we are enforcing, that we're inspecting and enforcing those things. Over time, we have to get better at this. And so, I don't know how our regulations, although they did receive that relatively recent revision with regard to stormwater, it's not clear that they're completely compliant to the level at which they need to be. So I wanted to bring that to this group's attention and let you know that I'm going to be reaching out to Stratford Regional Planning to see if they can do an evaluation from the scope of.
They were the ones that did,
MS4.
well, I mean, Liz Durfee started out doing it, and then she left, and then there was another planner from Stratford that did it with a grant. That, what's her name? Susan?
Susan Slack was,
No, not Susan Slack, your selectman.
oh, Suzanne.
Suzanne.
Yes.
She got it, and so they went through.
And I think that's what those two revisions
But,
came
I
from.
mean, they went through everything and made sure everything was compliance, and then, what's his name, from Civil Consultants.
Jay Stevens.
Jay reviewed everything, so I don't know where we're lacking.
Okay, so if you think Jay reviewed it, I would reach out to him and see what he knows. What's not clear is whether or not the regulations changed since they've reviewed it. But there were also
Right.
in our.
It's under 2 years, I think, so.
But in our notice of intent, which is the filing for approval of this permit, there were 3 things that had to be accomplished. And 2 of them, it looks like, were what was approved in, the not too distant past. There's one thing that seems to be outstanding, and I don't remember if it's what actually falls within the planning regs, or if it's the IDDE ordinance, the illicit discharge detection and elimination ordinance, which they are trying to get us to adopt. It looks like we have to adopt, but it's not clear whether or not it makes sense to adopt it in its entirety as a template, or to break it apart and put it in existing regulations. So, I don't know if you have any experience or feelings about that.
I don't.
Okay.
I'd be lying if I said it
But if
did,
there's,
so.
if it's been a couple of years since we went through the public
Yeah.
outreach, and I know Suzanne was involved in that, but I'm sure there's been updates and changes since we went through that last, so I'm sure there's been
And
more stringent now
We had a
perhaps.
committee that met quite, I mean, because
Who's the committee? How,
It was the guy from the water and sewer, Mike,
Michael Point.
Mike LaPointe, me, Liz Durfee, maybe Suzanne, I can't remember. Because you had a grant and you needed matching funds,
Yes.
so I volunteered my time to get you the match. And we spent, I wanna say a year, meeting monthly. Were you on it or not? I can't
I remember you being in something like that.
So you met monthly and you went through all
Eh,
of
about
our,
monthly, maybe every other month during the summer, but yes, yeah.
but, so you took what they were prescribing as
Liz,
required.
Liz had a template that, from the Regional Planning Commission, and she basically bring us pieces and parts, we review it, say, yep, that works for us. I think Pat Macklin may have, he was on the committee too, I think.
Okay,
Unfortunately, Liz is no longer at the
right.
Planning Commission, but I'm sure they have a record of it.
I
I just don't know
will
what's
check
changed
this.
in 2 years, I can't believe much has changed. But it was a fair amount of work.
So that's a fair question, and I'm gonna look into that, because it's gonna cost some money to have anybody
Yeah.
review this again, but yet we have to be able to say that we're compliant to whatever.
Suzanne got the grant, got the money.
I remember that.
Yes, from the region, I don't know where it came from, but.
PREPA, it was the,
Yes, that's it.
it was a UNH
Yeah.
grant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. But yet I wasn't really involved in it. So I'll ask Stratford Regional if they have a record
Okay.
of what was approved and how it, I don't know how much they'd be able to say that it does or doesn't relate to currently required
Yeah.
regulations, but we're gonna have to know and be able to prove that we're
I'm
meeting
sure they
the
have some that can,
regulations.
yeah, they can do that.
So, this is probably gonna be an ongoing conversation.
Sure, no, it sounds like it needs to be. So as I understand it, you're going to look and see if there's any records relating to the grant meetings that John's part of.
Yes,
Whether-
those meetings, and also whether Stratford Regional has any record of their recommended revisions to our documents, and whether or not
We
they.
adopted everything that they recommended, I know that.
So I don't, I guess, knowing that we went through that process, could they speak to whether or not they feel as though there's a need for a further look? Have the EPA guidelines changed such that we should revisit the whole conversation, I guess is the question. Which is a distinct possibility.
And so even though we have this 5-year perimeter window, the EPA is allowed to change their recommendations within this window.
Well, this is the first year of this permit, and that happened 2 or so years ago. So we're on, we have guidelines that we have to, requirements that we have to meet, which change in each year of this permit. So
Okay.
planning regs are in there,
Okay.
regardless of what may have happened in the past.
All
But
right.
it will be ongoing because it's a 5-year permit. This will be
It
something
isn't,
we
well,
can
so the
review
whole
it.
idea of the stormwater permit is an ongoing thing, and it will be a bigger and more restrictive regulations going forward. I don't know how much planning documents is kind of a one and done thing, but even when we get our document, even once the documents are up to date and meet specifications, assuming that they don't already, we still need to work with the town to figure out how to create a process for adequate inspection and enforcement of those requirements. So we just,
And that wouldn't have been done in the committee that John was a part of.
all I can say is that the town is not necessarily as hyper-aware as it needs to be about the stormwater regulations and making sure that when there's a building permit pulled, that we are consulting whatever stormwater regulations and being really aware of integrating stormwater into every conversation, but more and more, we're finding out that that really needs to be the case. And likewise, with this board, it's something that we're gonna really not wanna waive, that we're gonna have to really evaluate and look into with all the proposals.
So when someone asks for a building permit now, what's the mechanism for seeing if the stormwater regs are being complied with?
Well,
So-
for a single-family house, nothing.
Well, it doesn't really pertain typically to a single-family house, it's more about a development. So for example, Oldenburg Lane has its rain gardens.
Yep.
So should that get approved with rain gardens as a town, so you know, they'll get the permits for those homes, and the homes will be built, and the rain gardens will be installed. But how the town are we going to keep it in our
that's what you're
radar to
saying.
go maintain those rain gardens? Whatever the frequency is of that, or is it on the homeowner, and how do we make sure that that's happening?
All right,
We need to just be mindful of that kind of stuff.
all right, thank you.
That's something that the EPA has got guidelines for now,
Yes.
and those are the ones that follow, supposedly.
Those are the ones that we are trying to make sure that we are integrating into our regulations and following, and then we are inspecting and enforcing.
So,
So we don't have that kind of all in place yet because it's still relatively new.
so there's no committee or board or individual assigned to do this, just at
So-
this point?
There's a stormwater committee which is charged with trying to understand what the permit requirements are and the EPA expectation is with regard to that permit, and how best, with the assistance of our neighboring communities, to approach getting compliant to a minimum standard. But it's still gonna be on the town to figure out these processes with, you know, for example, you know, there's a retention pond at the end of Wentworth Street as part of that development. I'm not sure that it's really on the highway department's radar to make sure in 3 years or 8 years, or when exactly should we go and make sure that it's cleaned out and functioning properly.
Okay.
So,
Other towns are doing this.
yes, well, to varying degrees.
I'm just
You
wondering.
know, it's a new permit, everybody in this area is in year 1 of this new permit. And we are trying to approach it in a unified manner, so that, you know, if we're all doing the same thing in the same way, you know, there's sort of protection and unity. Because there are, of course, different ways to interpret the requirements, and it's very technical. So we have a lot of guidance from UNH and from DES and EPA, and we're trying to absorb all that and yet implement it. But in any case, we have to make sure that our regs are up to date and that we are trying to create some kind of process within the town to make sure we're implementing, inspecting and enforcing regulations. So,
The county conservation, would they be, you know, part of this too?
probably not.
I was thinking with EPA, conservation.
So stormwater kind of goes in hand with conservation in the sense that the point of having our eye on stormwater is so that we can ultimately test the stormwater drainage, make sure the system's working properly, be aware of any illegal discharge that could be polluting waterways. I mean, so it's all for the intent of conservation, right? I mean, the goal is really to protect the waterways, which will protect the estuary, which, you know, it's all part of conservation, yes. But the regulations are really more on the town side, directed toward mapping out our storm drain system, seeing how they connect the storm drains to each other, where they outfall into the river, how they outfall into the state system,
Okay.
and making sure they're cleaned out, while at the same time, as a town, we have to notify and engage with the public with regard to how to dispose of yard waste and pet waste, and don't use too much lawn fertilizer, for example, because all of those things are nutrient-dense materials that, if concentrated, inevitably flow into the river and are
Right.
part of the impairments of our waterways. So
Okay.
that's the town job, is to make sure that the water that goes into the storm drain and ultimately into the river is as clean as possible. So we're gonna have to end up inventory, like having a better sense of the condition of our storm drains and which way they flow, and testing of them, and having, the IDDE ordinance is about regulating what goes into those storm drains. It's about fines for dumping things that you can't, which is a little bit redundant to the state statute, because you already can't do that per DES rules. So, but nonetheless, like storm drains and water runoff engaging with the public about good management practices with our yards and taking care of our dogs, so that we can protect. So,
Okay.
it's an
Yeah.
infrastructure thing, I guess. You know, it's an infrastructure regulation kind of thing at this point.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Caroline. So I understand there are some gentlemen who like to, that aren't on the agenda, that like to be heard in some regard. I am somewhat,
I promise you, less than 3 minutes.
well, and my concern isn't so much time as an attorney, I'm very much process oriented and, you know, given that there's been no
Sure.
public, you know, notice that you'll be appearing, I am somewhat reluctant. I mean, certainly anything we tell you today is not gonna be binding. John, do you have any concerns about this?
No, I mean, I think Jim wants to, no, I mean, Jim called me and asked me about the situation that he finds himself in. I think what he's trying to get from you is, what happened, what exactly was approved, and what are my options? So I think it would be no different than if you had you know, just coming in and asking them, all he wants to do is ask you about what happened. He doesn't, I don't think they're asking to modify anything yet.
All right, if you,
Is that fair?
yeah, please go have a seat and give your name and address, and knowing that nothing binding is gonna be done tonight.
I just have a couple of questions. I'm Jim Walcott from 171 Columbus Ave in Dover, New Hampshire. I purchased this lot probably a year ago. My wife and I were gonna live
You
there.
better back up,
Oh, sorry.
because we have 3 new board members.
Okay.
Do you have the plan?
Yep.
Can you just-
I figured you guys all knew this plan.
No, 3 of the members.
Okay.
This is
This way. Rollins Road right here, Wentworth greenhouses would be approximately here.
this is Jason Lavoie's land, and he was.
This is Lavoie's current house?
Well, he sold it.
Right, okay, but.
That was the house, this is the
Okay.
lot that you guys created.
All right, I know.
This is Shady Lane that runs up to the hospital eventually, over here.
In 30 years.
Someone said it was dry 150 years ago. But at any rate, Jason was in front of this board for the better part of 2 years, I would say. Wanted to do a subdivision. We had a different chair, a different board at the time. The chairman and I advised the applicant to just go get a variance to create this lot. He didn't do that. He agreed to, against my, I did not recommend approval of this plan. I think what he agreed to do was upgrade Shady Lane to Class 5 to town road standards, which would mean back into here. The problem what happened was, there was no road design. It was just a sort of, I think, a section of the road that Paul Conley, who was the engineer, gave us, but it was never designed. And I didn't know, but apparently this plan was recorded. The guy sitting to my right bought this land, and now he's trying to figure out what to do with it, because he can't build on it without having a town road. Is that fair?
That's correct. Yes, the Class 5 road, I knew that when purchasing the property, and it wasn't a big obstruction for me because I own the excavation equipment and Mr. Spencer owns stuff, so we can do that less expensively, for less money. But what I did not know, that I'd have to go to the selectmen to get the road, the Class 5 road approved, and then have them lay that out, and then obviously we're gonna have a public hearing at that point in time, I would assume. I don't really think I would ever be able to get that Class 5 road approved. The neighbors, nobody wants to open up the Class 5 road, that's the biggest issue out there. Now Carlton, I purchased the land, and when we decided not to move, Carlton had talked to me 6 months ago, and he said, I wanna sell that land, I wanna buy it. Because he grew up here in Rollinsford. So I called him and put it under agreement with him, so actually he's gonna be the applicant, and I would be the owner. And what he's just trying to do is build his house, and he knows the neighbors, and he's talked to them, and they say, Colin, you know what, if you wanna build your house out there, that's fine, we'd love it, but just don't open up that road, you know, that's their issue. So we would even deed restrict the property. We're gonna go to the zoning board next formally, you know, with actually Bob Stoll, and that just left. So we'll hit them up, we have 2 choices, either upgrade this to a Class 5 road, or go and seek 2 variances. One, for not being able to build if you don't have frontage on a street, and a street being defined in Rollinsford as a
Class 5.
Class 5 road, and then something about the definition of variance for the depth. So we're gonna go to the zoning board and try for that. So in the grand scheme of things, if we were lucky enough to get those variances, then this board becomes the hurdle for the building permit.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't? Oh, the selectmen, oh, the selectmen, that's
Well,
right.
I don't even want to care.
You guys have a lot of boards.
We have nothing.
Yeah, we have nothing, so-
Well, we have nothing to do with
But
it.
is there anything that you remember that you would want here, that you would want us to change? Because we're more than willing to change your plan and come back here. We'll go to the zoning board first, obviously, then come see you, but obviously, we don't want to get into details. Was there any big objections?
I guess I was on the board at that time, I wasn't the chairman, but we spent a tremendous amount of time on this property. And I'm not inclined to see any changes to what we
Okay.
struggled with for years.
That's great.
With Paul Conley and Attorney Shaheen coming in here, so
Yeah, that's in the past, I'm different.
Well, I understand you're
I don't
different,
do it like that. It's
but what
either
I
we
want-
all love each other or we don't.
what I want you to know, Mr. Wilkett, is that there was a big public hearing, a lot of people turned out, a lot of even a prior owner of that property said that they want to put a house back there and weren't allowed, and so I'm, really concerned about, just because the property's changed hands, that the hard work of the town should, be modified, so
No, that's fine.
I'm just not inclined to.
No, we won't modify, we're just gonna go with, it says you could reserve the right to obtain the 2 variances that's on the plan. And that's what I didn't see when I bought the property. I made the stupid assumption that a recorded plan was the conditions were met. And that was my fault for making that assumption, because you can record anything you want, but so basically, I bought the land out and I think I could build on it if I built it class 5. So we'll just leave it the way that it is and cross our fingers and hope for the zoning board. Hopefully Mr. Spencer can charm some people and we'll be able to get some variances.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again, by the way, Ted. All right, if there's any other business, would it be appropriate to entertain a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Seconded?
Yes.
Is that? All right,
What about his plan?
okay.
I don't think that has to be in the meeting, it just needs
Right,
to
I'll
sign.
sign it.
Okay.
I'll-
John has reviewed them, and the only thing missing was the certificate of monumentation, which I have in my office, so they're all set.
John, you okay with me to sign these plans?
Yes, well,
The Susan.
yes, yes, yep.
That's for a vote.
I will. All in favor of adjourning, of the motion to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, thank everyone for their time today, thank you again for the new members.
Well, unfortunately, you're getting caught in a lot of weird stuff right after that. It normally isn't like this.
It's a quick learning curve then.
It takes a little while just to absorb the terminologies.
Right.
Yeah, pocket.
It's all right, I wanna go visit that land that this fellow wanted to.
I will say that in the last, whatever, 3 or 4 years, I get called all the, what, can we do this, can we do that? Someone wanted to tear everything down, build